Hi, this is Pod Save the UK. I'm Zoë Grünewald.
And I'm Coco Khan. Great to have you back, Zoë, in the seat for Nish. What have you been up to?
Well, I've been wedding planning, actually.
Oh, very nice.
Just drop that in there.
You got a venue sorted? Or?
No, and actually, the venue thing has been a bit strange. When we went in to look around, the guy clearly felt very embarrassed, didn't really want us to be there, was a bit rude. And every room he took us into, there were people in there setting up for that evening's event. They were setting up bed frames and mattresses.
Yeah. Putting
candles on the stairs. They had some gothic decorations. And we were like, this is awkward because they're setting up for a sex party.
Have you ever been to one of those?
No.
Okay.
I haven't. And I'm not just saying that. I genuinely haven't.
Yeah, no, I haven't attended as a real attendee, but I have been as a sort of favour to a friend who wanted to go, and I just sort of tagged along because they needed company. Anyway, look, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
But the point
it's none of our business.
It's none of your business, okay? But the point is, what I found fascinating about sex parties, they're really boring. Yeah, the one that I went to, I'm not even joking, there was a queue for the spanking corner. A queue
for the spanking corner.
Yeah, they'd erected an area for spanking. You had a fixed amount of time that you had to be in, be out. And obviously, being Britain, we're very politely, people just queue. How awkward is that?
That is awkward. See, I just don't want a spanking corner at my wedding. No.
So you didn't book it then?
I didn't book it, no.
Okay.
But I'll send you the address. You might like it.
Stop it! Anyway, on the show today, sadly, no spanking corners, but just politics, which I think we can all agree is kicking our ass in different ways.
Yeah.
Are the government copying the Tories' homework? We're discussing their plan for a reform of the welfare system and Wes Streeting's plans to cut the fat from NHS middle management.
And later, we'll be talking about reform and the Tories' pair of not so special announcements.
The status quo is unacceptable, but it is not inevitable. We were elected on a mandate for change, to end the sticking plaster approach and tackle the root causes of problems in this country that have been ignored for too long. Because we believe in the value and potential of every single person, that we all have something positive to contribute and can make a difference, whether that's in paid work, in our families or communities, alongside our neighbours and friends. We will unleash this potential in every corner of the land, because we are as ambitious for the British people as they are for themselves. Today we take decisive action, and I commend this statement to the House.
So that's Liz Kendall. I think we could describe that as passionate.
It was a bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, a bit on the touch scary side, actually, I might say. So that's Kendall passionately announcing the government's long-awaited reforms of benefits, which she says will save £5 billion by the end of the next decade. So Zoe, what is in store?
Yeah, so Liz Kendall pointed out that 1 in every 10 working age Britain is claiming at least one type of health or disability benefit now. And that is 1 in every 8 young people aged 16 to 24 who currently isn't in work, education or training. And that's according to the ONS. So the measures that they've set out today includes a permanent above inflation rise to universal credit. But for new claims, the rate of universal credit health element, which is this extra incapacity benefit you could apply for, is going to be reduced by £47 a week. Ooh. So that is a £2,500 cut per year for disabled people on universal credit, which is pretty significant. The work capability assessment for universal credit will also be scrapped in 2028, with the PIP assessment process to be used instead. This was a bit of a rabbit out the hat, feels like the wrong term, because it wasn't a particularly nice surprise. But those aged under 22 will be no longer able to claim the incapacity benefit top up to universal credit. And Chris Mason on the BBC said that the under 22 policy appears to disrupt the flow of young people from school straight onto health benefits.
I always get a knee-jerk reaction when I hear about governments reforming benefits, because it's nearly always cuts. You very rarely hear about them saying, actually, these have been unbearable conditions for this community for a long time, and we are going to redo the benefit system with their dignity in mind. That never happened. So I always have a kind of instinctual distrust and dislike when I hear these kind of stories. We did an entire show on young people and how 1 in 8 are NEET, so not in education, employment or training. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the idea of this scarring effect, that if young people aren't in work pretty soon, that can have a knock-on effect to their incomes all the way into their their middle of the life, if not later. That, of course, means that they will be earning less, they'll be paying less into the coffers. It's a real massive problem for Britain as a whole. So I understand why they are taking the action, but I just cannot understand the logic of saying, well, okay, we'll take the safety net away from you. I don't get that. That's the bit I don't get. And there's lots about these announcements that I just genuinely, going into it, trying to be open-minded, I simply don't get.
I think that's a really good point, which is that, yes, clearly there is some issue happening with young people where they are unable for whatever reason to access employment and therefore are depending on the welfare system. But removing their ability to claim the incapacity benefit, which is this health benefit, what are you doing underneath all that to deal with issues of poor mental health, disability, other physical health issues that those young people might be experiencing? You're right. It's seemingly taking away the safety net, but maybe not actually addressing the underlying causes of why so many young people are falling out of employment, educational training.
Yeah, well, I think some of the analysis I've seen, and I should say from the right-wing press, there's a sense that the idea that you get more on incapacity than universal credit, and it is, quite a bit more, although it's worth mentioning that all these sums are paltry and you can't live a good quality of life on any of it. But that shouldn't be fair. That in a way, that's a kind of privilege. Everything we know about being unwell and long-term disability is that it simply costs more, so it makes sense to provide more. And so I wonder if even the fact that they're saying this about younger people as part of a wider conversation of bringing incapacity benefit down, that this is speaking to that idea that those people are getting an easy ride.
Yeah, I think so. And I think young people are always an easy political football to go after on these things. One good thing that the government has introduced is this right to try. So this means that people claiming sickness benefits can try out for a new job without immediately having their benefits cut. And obviously this is a good thing because previously it was almost a disincentive to look for work because there was a fear that you wouldn't be without your safety net if you tried to get a job. So this was something that was actually flagged by disability campaigners because they would come across people who actually wanted to try and find work but felt unable to because the system wasn't secure enough.
I would agree that sounds positive. And I'm really loath to get into this implied sense that like work is a moral virtue and we all must be doing it. And if you're not participating, you're somehow immoral or something like that. But there are, plenty of data that suggests that many people who have disabilities, they want to work, but the workplaces are not making fair adjustments to them. So the idea that they can try it out, see if that workplace is fair, is going to make the relevant adjustments and is a place that they can be healthy and thrive without that fear is, of course, wonderful, because otherwise you would take this risk. And aside from the fact that you would have this gamble in your safety net, you'd also have the problem that when you came to reapply again, God knows how long it would take. There's an enormous backlog and there's kind of systemic problems that persist across all the benefits. That's one positive thing, although it does feel like it is just the one, maybe.
Okay, well, let's turn to what has been probably the kind of biggest shock and something that's definitely going to continue to be spoken about for quite a long time, and I think is upsetting a lot of Labour MPs, which is the disability benefits. So the government said they would not means test or freeze personal independent payments. And obviously there's been a lot of briefing about the potential of that over the past week or so. But possibly the most politically controversial announcement was that eligibility rules for PIP are to be tightened and the assessment process will be reviewed. So this now means that disabled people will have to score 4 points in at least one category to qualify for the daily living element. This will not affect the mobility component of PIP, but there are now fears that lots of people who previously would have been eligible for PIP, who feel as if they need that payment, now will not be able to receive it. And therefore, lots of vulnerable people, disabled people already on the brink of poverty will now have money essentially removed from them or will no longer be able to claim this benefit.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's worth just going into some of the details for that, because if you haven't claimed it yourself, or if you haven't got a relative that claimed it yourself, you might not understand what this big unwieldy document is. And it essentially goes through different parts of your life to find out how well you're coping and what you can do independently and what you need assistance on. And essentially the more assistance you need, the more kind of money you get and vice versa. So some of the changes that are being proposed and look like they're going to go through is that, help cooking a meal. So that's a category that's been on for a long time. So it will exclude people who can use a microwave, but will include people who can't prepare a meal for themselves. So essentially, if you can't chop things, you are not able to use a hob or an oven because it's unsafe, whatever your condition might be, you would still qualify. But if you can use a microwave, you won't. And there's a part of me that I kept thinking about that for a while afterwards, thinking how dastardly it was, because microwave meals in general, very expensive. Microwave meals in general, quite unhealthy. And so if you are condemning the people who can use the microwave meals, you sort of force them into an unhealthy way of living and you punish them for it accordingly. And it's these little details that I find very unnerving. There's another one here about people who need help bathing. So if you need help with your upper body, you'll still qualify. But if you can't wash your own hair or your legs, your lower legs, you won't qualify. And you just think, well, if you need help washing your own hair, then, and you're saying, okay, well, that's not enough for assistance. I think about what it is like to be that person and how upset you must be all the time. There's a lack of humanity that I feel really underpins all these little exclusions that they've made.
I think that's the feeling, that already PIP assessments were being criticised as very kind of reductive, quite dehumanising, quite undignified in the way that they were conducted. Now tightening that is only going to make that worse. You know, it's only going to mean that people have to plead their case even more.
Yeah.
I think it just feeds into those narratives that disability campaigners are really keen to overcome and make the government aware of, which is that you can't just categorise everything away. You have to take a whole person view of all of this, and you have to make sure that people's vulnerabilities are understood in the round and not just as kind of scores on a piece of paper.
Yeah, and I think as well, you know, there will always be this additional question, which is like, okay, fine, if that person needs assistance and they're not getting assistance from the state, who are they getting it from? So either you're going to condemn them to a life of indignation and struggle, which, you know, I would say is morally reprehensible, or they're going to lean on their family, right? And we have a social care crisis and we have a caring crisis. And who are the people that pay in terms of caring? It's women as well. So that, you know, it all sort of starts adding up, and it's a gendered issue, it's a class issue, it's a workplace issue. And yet they just seem to constantly be lasering in on these disability claimants. It's cheap and easy.
I think that's a really important point. You know, this is about saving money.
Yeah.
But you're totally right. When you think about the care system, which is something in this country which has been ignored for so long because it was such a huge political issue, you know, this government have come in and again, they've kicked it into the long grass. They've announced a review. It's going to be a number of years, even though care campaigners are saying, no, we need a care strategy now. And you're right, it feels ill thought out. What are the long-term impacts of this? What are the impacts going to be on the rest of the economy? You know, if you've got people having to leave work to take care of relatives, that will have a perverse effect on their get back to work plans.
Yeah. So now last week, Nish and I had a great chat with Mikey Earhart from Disability Rights UK about the government's plan. Please do go back and check it out if you haven't already. It was a really fantastic interview. But here's what he made of Liz Kendall's finalised thoughts.
Let's be clear about today's announcements. There's nothing ambitious about them. They're about cutting support for disabled people at a really difficult time. Rising claims for personal independence payment reflect a problem with wider society and how we're barred from accessing it. It's got nothing to do with disabled people and instead reflects excessive government's failures to do even the bare minimum to create a more equitable society. There's one thing we wanted to tackle as well from this announcement is the minister's assertion that thousands more face-to-face assessments and reassessments for people going through the system will be more accurate or better. We know that face-to-face assessments are incredibly stressful for disabled people and often actually lead to inaccurate assertions and responses from assessors.
I really agree with his point about how, like, you know, if there are rising numbers, which there are, that's telling us something about the nation, and we should be having that conversation rather than honing in on disability claimants. I wasn't actually not aware of that, about how the face-to-face ones can be much more stressful. And again, you know, that's another example about how the devil's in these little details. And I can't imagine that any disability campaigners is feeling like they've been heard and consulted well, given these proposals and some of the details on it.
Now, Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Helen Whately responded by pointing out that most of the government's plans were originally Tory proposals and said that £5 billion worth of cuts do not go far enough. As we know, there have been weeks of leaks about the proposed cuts, and these have added fuel to the fire. So there's lots of angry Labour MPs that I've been chatting to and that we've been hearing from in anonymous briefings in the media. So some of them have stood up today and voiced their anger. So in particular, Labour MP Clive Lewis said the reforms would provide pain for millions of people. Obviously, Diane Abbott branded benefit cuts as not a Labour thing to do. Pat McFadden has defended the cuts, saying you can't tax and borrow your way out of needing to reform the state, and that the cabinet is united behind the move. But as we know, ministers, including Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband and others, are said to have voiced concerns in private, and there have been briefings all week for backbench Labour MPs to try and bring them on side with Liz Kendall's plans.
I was actually not aware that 1 in 10 working age people, would be impacted or has claimed these health-related benefits before. So that's a sizable demographic of people in the UK. I mean, it seemed to me like political suicide to be pushing on ahead with this. But is it, do you think?
I think Labour MPs feel that there is an amoral case to be made for some reform to the welfare system.
Amoral as in amoral?
As in a space moral.
Okay, cool.
As in, if you have a rising welfare bill, it's clearly an indication that there is some problems with the nation's health. You would always expect the government to provide a safety net, but if people who previously would not have needed it are now having to take up welfare, then that is an indication that there's something wrong with the care system, there's something wrong with communities, there's something wrong with the NHS. So I think Labour MPs understand that, and also being a party of supporting workers, you can understand why, if people are saying we want to work but we're being disincentivised from doing so, the Labour government would feel that it's their job to make sure that work is suitable for disabled people or people who are ill. And of course, this also goes alongside the fact that Labour have implemented a number of policies that Labour MPs are worried will hit vulnerable people. So, for example, the winter fuel allowance, means testing that. They are hearing now from their constituents saying, I've lost my winter fuel allowance.
Yeah, of course.
My neighbour is now, are they not going to be able to claim their disability benefit? And I've had Labour MPs saying to me that they're really frustrated about the comms of this, leaking these briefings to papers and then having constituents ring them and email them upset, thinking they're going to lose their money already in a cost of living crisis. It's just gone down very, very badly. So I think not only are they cross about some of the policies that were put out there, but they're also cross about the way this has been handled. It's interesting, there's a piece in The Guardian today by Gabby Hinsliff, who was basically saying what we're saying, which is time for taxes to rise and Labour need to be honest about it. And she said, call it a defence levy, a national resilience programme, or a patriot tax.
Oh,
maybe that is the kind of language.
Who
doesn't want to pay a patriot tax? I mean, I don't. But if I was,
no offence, mate, you can't. But
and I can't anyway. But she was saying, call it a patriot tax if you want to win over the sun. But the time is running out to make the case for it. So if you want to do it, you've got to do it now. Otherwise, people are going to go, no, the moment's past.
So listeners, I've got a question for you. I'm hoping you've got one for us as well, because we have a mailbag special coming up and we want you to email us your questions. So anyway, in the spirit of this, let's have a go. Here's one for you, Zoe. Who's your favourite politician of all time? No rules. Anyone you want.
Well, I guess in terms of good things they've done.
Yeah.
Clement Attlee, architect of the welfare state. You've got to give him credit where credit's due. That was a good thing. I like Andy Burnham. I am a fan of Andy Burnham. I think he has basically applied the principles of the welfare state in some ways to Manchester. He's been a good voice. I think he's been a good example of what devolution can look like. I think he's been a good kind of representation of the Manchester community. I don't really have ties to Manchester, but when you think of Manchester, I think a lot of people do think of Andy Burnham.
Well, that was such a informative answer. I was just going to go Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec or something.
Oh, nice. Yeah, she's probably way better.
We love an earnest person on this show, and she is very, very earnest. Lisa at the UN, Lisa Simpson.
Yes. Lisa Simpson at the UN. That's a great one, yeah.
Bring earnest back. I want more sincerity in politics again. So if you have questions for us, please do send them in to psuk@reducelistening.co.uk and stay tuned for the episode in a couple of weeks' time.
PodSave the UK is brought to you by Voy.
If you are considering using weight loss products, which is of course completely your choice, then you might want to know about Voy.
Voy is a new weight loss program that combines medication and one-to-one lifestyle coaching to help you achieve weight loss healthily, happily, and in a way that sticks.
Because unlike what we've all been told for seemingly forever, that weight loss is just about willpower and we should all be trying a little bit harder, Voy knows that it's actually about finding the right approach for you. All of our bodies are different. All of our lifestyles are different. It's why they call themselves the last weight loss program you'll ever need. So through coaches and doctors who can prescribe medication, you'll get the support you need to stay on track.
With one-to-one coaching on the Voy app, Voy has already helped over 70,000 people lose weight and keep it off.
Get started now and get an exclusive discount on the Voy programme when you go to joinvoy.com/PSUK. That's JOIN Voy, VOY.com/PSUK.
Treatments will only be prescribed if deemed appropriate by a qualified healthcare professional following a consultation. Join voy.com/PSUK to get started.
So, Zoe, on the show last week, we spoke about Wes Streeting's plans to cut 50% of NHS England. And the very next day, we heard that they're going even further, abolishing NHS England completely and setting their sights on other health quangos. What is going on here?
Well, first, dear listener, what's a quango, I hear you ask? Well, they are quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisations, of course. I don't know why we don't just call it by its full name. It's so easy. They're officially referred to as non-departmental bodies, which basically means that they operate independently but are still funded and accountable to the government. So NHS England is a quango. It's the world's biggest one. HMRC is a quango. Network Rail is a quango. And Great British Energy will be a quango.
Okay, and so what isn't a quango?
Well, NHS England, or not anymore, at least. So some quick facts about NHS England. It was set up in the Tory Lib Dem coalition government by the then Health Minister Andrew Lansley through the Health and Social Care Act of 2012. It was hugely controversial. So one of our favourite quotes from the time was from an NHS leader who said the overhaul was so big it was visible from space. Previously, like we will see again, the Department of Health and Social Care was in charge of the NHS in England, while in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, they had their own services, which incidentally are run by the respective governments.
Okay, so the Tories claimed that NHS England would improve services and efficiency, but critics feared that it would lead to creeping privatisation, a drop in service and a lack of accountability. Writing a few years after its establishment, the King's Fund, an independent think tank focused on the NHS, found that the reforms resulted in top-down reorganisation of the NHS, which was distracting and damaging, that new systems of governance and accountability are complex and confusing, and that the absence of system leadership is problematic. Fast forward now to a report into the NHS that Wes Streeting commissioned when he took office in 2024. Lord Darcy, an independent peer, wrote that the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 was a calamity without international precedent. It proved disastrous. The result of the disruption was a permanent loss of capability from the NHS.
When announcing the plans to axe NHS England last week, Streeting called it the final nail in the coffin of the disastrous 2012 reorganisation, which led to the longest waiting times, lowest patient satisfaction and most expensive NHS in history. Here he is speaking to the BBC.
Frontline NHS leaders are complaining to me that they could deliver better care for patients and they could deliver better value for taxpayers, but they are often receiving a barrage of commands, sometimes contradictory and competing demands from the Department for Health, from NHS England and from the wide range of regulators in this space. If we can simplify this, it's always a complicated system, it's a complex system, but if we can simplify as much as we can and do away with this idea that everything in a system this vast, this big, can be commanded and controlled with levers being pulled in Westminster and Whitehall, we'll be setting up the NHS to succeed.
So that's what Wes Streeting is saying, but here's the opinion of a manager working inside NHS England.
There are definitely areas of duplication between it and the Department of Health, but I think that it's really limited in scope, the amount of duplication that there actually is between the two institutions. And there are obviously better ways about mitigating that problem than just abolishing the organisation in totality. I also think having NHS England being moved to Department of Health, I don't think is good for the NHS because it's going to decrease the amount of stability that you get. And NHS strategy needs to be looking at kind of 10-year forward views and being able to sensibly implement those strategies over multiple different years. If you just look at the previous Conservative government, where there were, 4 or 5 different governments in 4 or 5 years or so, that kind of tonal shift in policy making is not going to lead to better spend for the NHS. You want the kind of 200 billion odd spend that it's got each year to actually have one cogent strategy which is implemented over successive years rather than constant politicization of the NHS approach.
Very interesting point you make there, because You could argue that Labour are making this decision with the idea that it's always going to be them in charge. And of course, they can be trusted, but it might not be.
Yes. And I think what's really interesting is the argument for NHS England originally was to take it out of that political short-termism that the NHS England manager we just heard from was speaking about. But you could also argue that that was a political decision as well, because the Lansley reforms, in many ways, were a way of the Tory government doing some of the slightly more unsavoury things to the NHS, but also being able to be like, oh, this doesn't have our fingerprints all over it. So in a way, it was the choice to actually create NHS England and the rest of the Lansbury reforms were political as well. And I think this idea of there could be a sort of political short-termism to decisions around the NHS now, because it will be back in the hands of an elected leader who will be thinking about how they get another 5 years in government. While that is a good point, you could also make the argument that it was actually very difficult to achieve some things because of the bureaucracy that was created by NHS England. So to actually get things done quicker, and this is not necessarily an argument I agree with, but an argument that could be made, actually streamlining it, getting rid of NHS England might actually help politicians to get the job done quicker than if they are kind of waiting for NHS England to sign things off or to do their own reviews.
The question I always have whenever I hear about like organisational changes is this a way to divert our attentions, or certainly to appease people without tackling the real thorny issue, which is we are an increasingly unwell population and we need money into the NHS.
This is a reorganisation that already people are saying, is this going to divert attention away from some of the really serious systemic issues facing the NHS? So, the core challenges of underfunding, the ageing population, health inequalities. If all this time and money is going to be spent on, redundancy payments or reviews or restructures, is that taking money and resources away from the health service at a time when it desperately needs as much attention and focus as possible? So although, there is an argument it might pay off in the long run, can the NHS afford another review, another restructure, when really there are some really serious existential issues facing it right now? What you can think is maybe promising is that Wes Streeting is saying the buck stops with him now.
Well, it has certainly attracted a lot of criticism. That's putting it nicely. The Institute for Government says the government is embarking on a major reorganisation of the superstructure of the NHS that is not fully thought through and which it did not intend to do in the first place. The King's Fund, so that's the think tank we heard from on the original reorganisation into the NHS, said that reorganisations take far longer than you think, they end up costing far more than you anticipate, and they leave you with a distracted and demoralised workforce. I'm glad they've mentioned workforce here, because it's important to say that, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs in this. So look, questions are going to abound as to how this is all going to play out, but we need to make it clear that as patients, the changes will not impact anyone's access to the NHS. It will still be free at the point of use and cover all the services it does already. So I guess the question is, what was the point of this politically then?
So there are criticisms and complaints about NHS England that have been going on for quite a while. The fact that there have been duplicated services is something that's been talking about for a long time. When Keir Starmer was talking about this, he was talking about, why are there two comms teams? Why are there two strategy teams? Surely it would make sense to have a more streamlined version of this. The reason that's difficult for a Labour government is because a Labour government gleefully announcing job losses under the name of efficiency savings just doesn't sit well with Labour voters often, because
sounds
Labour,
a bit Doge, doesn't it?
It does sound a bit Doge. And I think that this was also in the context of these reports of Project Chainsaw, this kind of Labour together and the centre of the Labour government joining forces, thinking about how they can cut through public spending and make things more efficient. And, this kind of sentiment that maybe Dominic Cummings was right, that's been echoing around Whitehall, which I think is something you wouldn't associate with the Labour government. So, these planned cuts of 20,000 to 30,000 jobs, plus the statements that Keir Starmer was making about the civil service needing streamlining and artificial intelligence jumping in and doing people's job, I think just to me feels very non-Labour. That being said, clearly streamlining, they believe, could generate some administrative savings. They say possibly up to $1 billion a year. That's worth saying. That's out of about a 200 billion annual budget for the health service. So it's kind of pretty small, really. But, 1 billion maybe not to be sniffed at. And they're hoping it would simplify oversight, reduce bureaucracy. But I guess just because you streamline NHS England doesn't mean Wes Streeting is going to get the work off his desk quicker.
Right.
It's still incredibly complex. The NHS is a huge beast, even without NHS England there. As you just pointed out, Coco, there are criticisms from think tanks that this hasn't necessarily been thought through. So they haven't really explained how this will improve health outcomes or address NHS funding gaps. There's also uncertainty about how this fits in with their devolution goals. So, they're talking about more centralised power of the NHS, putting it back in Westminster. But what about integrated care boards and care in the community and local leaders? So there's lots of questions over that. And I think ultimately this looks, again, like a cost-cutting exercise to deal with NHS overspending rather than a coherent health strategy and focusing on those real long-term problems that the NHS is dealing with, such as funding, such as health inequalities, the ageing population.
And in the context of the Labour government, we've talked about on this podcast about how they seem to be taking a kind of managerial approach. They're sort of tinkering around the edges. They're here to streamline and improve things, but not actually change the status quo. Is this a deviation from this? I mean, there's people are saying it's absolutely massive. Is this the big change that, they've been saying they're going to bring?
If you're cutting NHS England, that is a huge change. But in the general scheme of the NHS and all the issues it's facing, no, it is not enough to fix the NHS. The problems that society is facing, a lot of it comes down to austerity and underfunding and just trying to cut jobs and thinking that will help reduce public spending and get public services back on their feet. I think most economists would agree that's pretty naive. So I think this is very in keeping with the tone of the government so far. I don't think, if people are wondering, what does this mean for me? No, I don't think it necessarily means they're going to get an NHS appointment any quicker. And people aren't going to feel this, I don't think. I think as a government who is running scared of the right-wing papers, it's much easier to talk about efficiency savings because you speak their language than it is to talk about funding.
Now, it feels like we could all use a break from the news. So if you want to dive into a great story, Crooked just released a podcast that we think you will love. It's called Shadow Kingdom, God's Banker.
In the summer of 1982, the Vatican's top money man was found dead. Roberto Calvi, known as God's banker, was embroiled in an infamous money laundering scandal that tied him to an ultra-secretive far-right society, the Sicilian Mafia and the Catholic Church.
His death was ruled a suicide, but the evidence, that told a different story. So for decades, no one could say for sure what really happened until now. Journalist Niccolo Mainoni is following a new lead, one that could finally answer the question, who killed God's banker?
We love this series because it's super immersive, it's fun, mysterious, and a little bit sinister. All of the things we look out for our next true crime binge.
Yeah, and I say this as someone who is I'm on the true crime thing.
Oh, me too.
And it's weird with true crime as well, because at the end of the day, I ask myself, why does it continue to reward me? I know what's going to happen, i.e. somebody dies and it's really, really bad. But it's just incredible how these tales can touch different parts of society. And this one really does that. Mafia, Catholic Church, a far-right group. I'm really, really excited to see it, as well as just the reporting. I always love hearing some new reporting. So we've dropped episode 1 of the show right here on Pod Save the UK a few days ago. Do check it out. And if you love it, you can hear episode 2 by subscribing to the Shadow Kingdom feed, wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you don't want to wait, you can binge the whole thing today by joining Friends of the Pod at crooked.com/friends or subscribing on the Shadow Kingdom Apple Podcast channel. But anyway, after the break, we're talking about Reform's special announcement. Ugh.
Pod Save the UK is brought to you by Shopify.
That's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run and grow your business.
Shopify is the commerce platform that's revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide.
So whether you're selling succulents or stilettos, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person so that you can spend the rest of your time growing your business.
Covering all your sales channels from a shopfront-ready POS system to its all-in-one e-commerce platform, Shopify even gets you selling across social media marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
So you can also customize your online shop to suit your style, as well as connecting with new customers to drive growth and even maintain the relationships to keep them coming back. So no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify are there. New sellers around the world are doing exactly this every minute. They're revolutionizing their businesses and making their first sales with Shopify.
What's lovely about Shopify is that no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify will be there to empower you with confidence and control to take your business to the next level. It's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today.
This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/podsavetheuk, all lowercase.
Go to shopify.co.uk/podsavetheuk to take your business to the next level today.
Now, Coco, can we please speak about Reform's special event?
I mean, I'm not loving the sound of this. It's got a bit of a sausage surprise element, doesn't it?
It does a bit, and which is apt considering all of the Reform's MPs are male. Anyway, so Reform love to do these special announcements. And most of them tend to be pretty big nothing burgers. But it is one way to get a Westminster journalist to rock up at your presser.
Mm-hmm.
So following on from their drama last week where they kicked out the hardline culture warrior Rupert Lowe, your bestie,
My mate.
bringing them back down to 4 MPs, their special announcement is they've had
Yeah, go on.
29 councillors defect to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mostly from the Tories and Independents. Oh, and 1 Liberal Democrat.
Okay, I'm going to confess. Is that a lot? I don't actually know. Is that a lot?
No, it puts them at about 113 councillor seats. So for some context, the Greens have over 800 councillors.
Oh, wow.
The Liberal Democrats have over 3,000. Even the Tories have over 5,000. And Labour have over 6,500. And that's not to mention that there are, of course, 2,300 independent councillors. Would I hold a presser for that? Would I invite everyone in Westminster? Probably not. No, I'd probably keep it to myself, actually.
That's what I'm saying. This is a sausage surprise.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure where it's from, but I think it's from EastEnders with the icon, Jean Slater.
Of course, okay.
That's her like trademark meal, but the surprise is there's no sausages in it. So this has very much, you come for the sausage surprise, it's not a sausage vibe about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a sausage surprise. And I think there was a reason for this. Farage obviously wants to distract from the fact that there have been hundreds of people who've left the party after Rupert Lowe was ousted. Feels really divided. I am told reliably, because I'm not on X anymore, that people are still going on about it and having a go at each other. Right. And it's really dividing the Reform Party. Also, the fact that there was this revelation that was revealed by the papers last week that a Reform UK candidate, whose name was Jack Aaron, had praised Hitler and Assad. He was put in charge of vetting for the party as well. So apparently he had also claimed that Vladimir Putin's use of force in Ukraine was legitimate and had made comments as part of this pseudo-scientific theory of personality types that he's very much into. So obviously the papers were going on about that. There was also the issue between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe. It's also worth saying that a spokesperson for Reform said Mr. Aaron is Jewish and sits on his local synagogue council. His grandfather came to this country as a refugee from Vienna, and much of his family on that side were murdered by Hitler's regime.
Okay, wow. So Reform also claim that they're building momentum despite their reduced presence in the House of Commons, but they're still ridiculously small in comparison to other parties. But that said, there is a real risk that they may claim the seat vacated by former Labour MP Mike Amesbury after he was convicted of assaulting one of his constituents. The race is on, basically. What are your thoughts on this one?
So polling recently suggested that Reform would take 40% of the votes, compared to Labour's 35%.
That's close.
It is close. It will be interesting to see whether the row in Reform has damaged their chances. It will also be interesting to see whether a coalition of voters forms as a kind of keep Reform out. Because we haven't really seen that yet. Obviously, Reform feel pretty confident about this seat and Labour are quite worried. And I think if there is a real nibbling away at Labour's vote by Reform, or if Reform do take it, then we might see more of that Labour shifting to the right in response, because they have been worried about Reform and they kind of became alert to the challenge of Reform a bit too late.
So another special announcement, Kemi Badenoch has officially ditched the Conservatives' commitment to net zero by 2050, which was a policy initially brought in by Theresa May and which she herself has advocated for as a government minister. Hold the front page. Kemi said one thing, then she said something else. Who knew?
Yeah, there's the fact that Kemi Badenoch served as Business and Trade Minister in a government that adhered to its net zero targets. She said during the press conference that objecting to those targets was above her pay grade. I mean,
Right.
you know, she was Secretary of State. They weren't above her pay grade. So it kind of all looks a bit flimsy. It's also silly because the public like the net zero targets. They believe in them. I mean, quite overwhelmingly, actually. I know there is a representation of anti-net zero rhetoric in the right-wing media, but actually, if you look at public polling, people tend to like net zero. They think it's a good idea. This is exactly the sort of thing that I think are going to put off more of those moderate voters that the Tories have so desperately been trying to hold on to. And also, once again, it reads as a copying reform policy, I think. You know, it reads as we just had to take something Reform was saying because we're trying to get those voters back. And why would you go for the light version if you were that kind of voter? You'd stick with the party that said it first and said it with their chest.
So Politico was reporting that a Tory official said it's a politically stupid and economically illiterate move that will only lead to electoral disaster. One thing we can agree on, though, so at a press conference after her announcement, she was asked what she does to cut emissions herself. And she replied that she does not buy many clothes for her children and that recycling is cheaper. So, I mean, we agree that hand-me-downs are great, charity shops are wicked, but I don't know why, but it just really made me laugh. She's like, well, I don't buy clothes for my children. It's so classic. Like, I get it. You're not fun. You're not fun person.
Also, not her, just her kids. Yeah, they can get the hand-me-downs.
Yeah, exactly. I've been thinking a lot about the Conservatives recently, not just... I mean, obviously they live in my mind rent-free, but I had this like weird thing that happened to me over the weekend. So just two contextual points. Recently on the show, we've been joking about, where are the Conservatives? They're so irrelevant. You don't even hear from them. They're meant to be the opposition. Yeah, it's kind of funny, but also, you know, not great in terms of our political system. And Nish said last week, if anyone sees a Conservative, let us know. So that's one contextual point. The other contextual point is that I'm having a really big problem with cupboard storage. I cannot seem to open a cupboard without getting brained by something falling out. And so it is that on Sunday, I found myself at IKEA. And who should I see? James Cleverly.
James Cleverly.
It was, I mean, I really hope it was James Cleverly because I didn't go up to him and say, excuse me, are you James Cleverly? But I was in my car and I saw a very James Cleverly looking man walk past, you know, very sort of dapper chinos, looked very, you know, almost West London. And I just sort of mused out loud, oh, that guy looks a lot like James Cleverly. And there was a couple of other people in the car and they were all like, no, I think that is James Cleverly. Oh my God, that is James Cleverly.
So was it in the car park?
Or was it in the car park?
Oh, because I would have loved to have known what he was buying. You know, was he having some meatballs?
I remember quite vividly last year talking about James Cleverly when he was Foreign Secretary and he was doing a tour around Latin America and there'd all be these photos of him in a sort of white linen shirt and a little red cravat and he's living a very glamorous life. I wouldn't be surprised if he flew by private jet. And I sort of commented being like, oh God, James Cleverly's on a gap year.
How the mighty have fallen.
How the mighty fall. It's truly humbling.
Not that there's anything wrong with IKEA. It's a great day out.
We are all democratised by meatballs.
Okay, so we heard a special announcement from Reform and obviously a special announcement from the Tories. Do you have a special announcement you'd like to share with us?
I know why you're doing this because you saw me grimace. I made a mistake. I previously talked about sausage surprises and how Jean Slater's sausage surprise was that there's no sausages. I was completely wrong. I made an error. If you watch this on YouTube, you might even be able to pinpoint the moment that I realised looking at my phone that I've got it wrong. Jean's sausage surprise famously has loads of sausages and she sticks them up like the O2. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I confess that I got it confused with an iconic episode of Come Dine With Me. This is what happens when you're a high consumer of popular culture, okay? Things get sausagey in there. And in an episode of Come Dine With Me, a woman serves a trifle and the surprise is there's sausages in it. No one expected a dessert with sausages. And so my mind got a little bit garbled. And I'm also having the mortifying experience of having to look at my laptop now and I see a note from my producer saying, also, just fact checked, James Cleverly's gap year. Last year he was Home Secretary. He was only Foreign Secretary until end of 2023. All right,
Coco,
fine, thank you.
You're becoming a liability. You really are.
I know. This is actually mortifying. This is a really horrible thing that's happening. Where's Nish? Nish would never do this to me.
And that's it.
Thanks for listening to Pod Save the UK, also known as my humiliation episode. And a reminder that we want your questions for our upcoming mailbag special. If you've got a burning question for me, for Zoe, for Nish, please do drop us a line at psuk@reducelistening.co.uk.
And don't forget to follow at PodSaveTheUK on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. And we're on Blue Sky now as well. So follow us at podsavetheuk.crooked.com. And if you want more of us, and why wouldn't you, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Pod Save the UK is a reduced listening production for Crooked Media.
Thanks to senior producer James Tyndale and producer May Robson, with additional research by Isabella Anderson.
Our theme music is by Vasilis Fotopoulos and our engineer was Jeet Vasani.
The executive producers are Tanya Hines, Madeline Herringer and Katie Long, with additional support from Ari Schwartz.
And remember to hit subscribe for new shows on Thursdays on Amazon, Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts.